welcome to the Box Home. We are so glad that you joined us this week.
So glad.
And we're real excited about this week's topic, which is how do you communicate your expectations? If you remember from last week, we talked about when those expectations go unmet, how to hope the best in your spouse. And we kind of left a cliffhanger to talk about this week, which is how do you actually communicate about those though, which is a super important question.
Yeah, it is. And what happens oftentimes when an expectation is unmet, it's the first thing that happens is that you realize you had an expectation. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you don't even recognize an expectation of yours until, it's unmet. And so when you recognize it, the tendency is to go one of two ways that are unhealthy. One is to bury your expectation, meaning like don't voice it, or to voice it right away as a demand. And the problem with either one of those ways to go about expressing your expectation is that they undermine unity within a marriage. And that's a problem because in a lot of ways you can boil down a healthy marriage to oneness. Genesis 2:24, where God creates marriage, he says the two will become one. And so the idea of a healthy, flourishing marriage is when there's a lot of oneness, a lot of unity within it. But if you're not bringing yourself to the table, your expectations to the table, instead you're burying them, then you're not going to provide an opportunity for oneness because you're not bringing yourself to the table. Or if you bring your expectations with a clenched fist, with a demand, that also works against any kind of unity or oneness. And so the way that we try to practice is voicing our expectations with an open hand, where you bring yourself to the table, but not as a demand, but as a stated desire.
Absolutely. So if you remember last week, I shared that Jake will work late sometimes, which is totally reasonable, but my expectation is that he'll give me a heads up, that he'll let me know when he's needing to work late so I can plan accordingly. And when that expectation goes unmet, how do you communicate it? I don't want to go passive aggressive and bury it and not say anything. I don't want to be demanding. And so what that looks like is, for me, it's helpful for me to think through timing, because right when he gets home isn't usually the best timing for me to be really carrying in that conversation. And so I think through a time to approach the conversation, and then I say something like, hey babe, remember last Wednesday when you were working late and you didn't let me know that you were going to be working late? It would really be so helpful to me if you could communicate that you're going to be running late in the future so I can set my expectations. My assumption is that you were so busy and you were probably really stressed and wrapped up in what you were doing that you didn't think about that. But it would be a huge help if you could let me know in the future. Is that something you feel like you could do?
Yeah.
And then I leave it as a question to see if it's something, an expectation that he can meet.
Mm-hmm. Or for example, what that looks like from my conversations with Krista, one of the very few ways that she doesn't meet my expectations at times is in regards to running late.
Just a few times.
And this is a good example of a reoccurring conversation, because over the 16 years of our marriage, we've had this conversation quite a few times. And what it looks like for me to do this, to voice this expectation, is again to pay attention to the timing and the tone and tact, all of those things we've talked about before. Find the right time to bring it up, and then to state it as, hey babe, I'd love to talk to you about this again, just to see if we can do anything to help us get to places on time. We've been running late a lot lately, and so can we talk about that? And for us, or for me in this case, the expectation is open-handed in the sense that I know that it will not be met 100% of the time. And so I just have to let go of that in the sense that we're going to find a solution and it's never going to happen again. I've given up on that expectation. But I do want to voice it, and we can reconvene, have a conversation about, see if there's something I can do to help out along the way. And also yet know this might not be able to happen, and therefore I'm holding it with an open hand.
And it's just so important that you're having these conversations, because when you do, you're providing an opportunity for your spouse to show you love in the future, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
But you're also inviting them into a conversation about that expectation, because sometimes you together as a team, you may need to adjust that expectation in order for it to be in line with your current reality. And so you can't have that team type of conversation to adjust unless you're inviting your spouse into that conversation with an open hand.
Right. Another reason why an open hand is helpful for a flourishing marriage is because when you bring yourself to the table, your expectation to the table, and your spouse isn't able to meet that expectation, then at a minimum, what happens is that your spouse sees that you're having to let go of something, and that is an act of selfless love, sacrificial service on behalf of another. And when they see that you're having to let go of one of your expectations because they can't meet it, or perhaps even they're unwilling to meet it, which I know is hard, but even in that, they can at least see how you're serving them. And that can elicit gratitude from them and gratitude for the other, how that they're serving you, even letting go of an expectation. And that's one of the things that can be really healthy for a marriage.
Okay, y'all, this is going to require some things from you. Not just that you're voicing it with an open hand, but it's going to require humility. Maybe that humility looks like resigning to the fact that your way may not be the only right way to do things. It's going to require grace, probably grace for your spouse when they don't meet your expectation 100% of the time, or maybe it's met with a little defensiveness, having grace towards them. And it's going to require love, like Jake was talking about, that sacrificial love. And it's going to require what we call the 4 T's, which we've talked about before, but really thinking through the right timing for that conversation, making sure that your tone is kind, that you're tact, that you've thought through the words that you're going to use in that conversation, and that you're really, your truth, which is the 4th T, is just that you're really actually talking about the matter. And so it's going to require these things of you, but it's really going to lead to that connectedness, that flourishing in your relationship as you lean into those expectation conversations.
Yeah. So our encouragement here on how do you communicate your expectations well is don't bury them, bring yourself to the table, but don't do it as a demand, but come with an open hand. And that's going to really help. So here's our assignment for you guys this week. First of all, just a reminder, we'd love to hear from you. So comment on this, or you can text us any questions that you have.
Yeah, our phone number is 512-851-1234. So you can text that number with any questions or suggestions.
Yes. And then as far as conversation for you to have with your spouse, this week we'd really encourage you to find some good time, sit down and have a meaningful conversation, and ask this question. Do you have any unvoiced expectations that I am not meeting, or that you would at least like to express to me? And then if you're the one that's sharing these expectations, do so with an open hand, not as a demand, but engage, but willing to let go of it. I think it's going to help your conversation go well.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, we love y'all. Y'all take care.
Bye.
Bye.